Alrighty, hello everyone. We are now live, which is so exciting. Hello, hello. Welcome to this free masterclass, How to Dial Down Your Inner Critic. I'm going to be sharing my 4-step process with you all today. It's one that I personally have used in my own life and one that I teach my clients how to dial down their inner critic. So, such a juicy conversation today. I am just going to wait for a few moments to see if we have anyone joining us live today. Awesome. So, a big hello and warm welcome if you are joining me live. It is so wonderful to have you here. If you are live with me, can you please say hi? Leave me a little emoji in the comments and just let me know that you can hear me and see me okay and that we're all ready to go. I'd also love to know where you're tuning in from around the world. I know that we had so many people sign up to this masterclass from all over the globe, which is just so cool. So if you don't mind sharing, I'd love to know where you're at. Awesome. Alrighty, I'm going to wait a few more moments, but I would also love to extend a big hello and welcome to those of you who are watching this on the replay. It is so good to have you here with us, and well done for coming back to this and wanting to work on yourself, because you may have heard me say this before, may have heard this quote that knowledge is power. And while I agree that that is true, I also want to just have a little, like, add a bit more to that and say that knowledge is actually potential power, and that the true empowerment actually comes from taking action and implementing the stuff into your life. So, if you haven't already, go grab yourself a paper and pen so that you can jot down some notes today, and then you can actually start to implement them and put them into practice to dial down your own inner critic. Wonderful. Hello, lovely ladies. So good to have you live with me. Awesome. So, just a few more moments, see if anyone else is going to be jumping on live. Otherwise, we're going to get started because we have so much juiciness to share today. This is such a massive topic and one that I love talking about. So, I know that there's going to be lots to cover. Just FYI, if you have any questions throughout the masterclass today, please feel free to ask them in the comments box. I'm gonna go through the content for today's call, and then I'll circle back to those questions at the end. So we'll have lots of Q&A time towards the end of the call. But feel free to pop them in the comments and I will come back to them. Just know that I haven't forgotten them, but we will get through the content first. So feel free to ask anything that relates to inner critic and anything that I mention today. Wonderful. So many people. Hello, Grace, Andrea, Sally Ann, Sophie. Hi, hi, hi. How exciting. It is so nice to have some people live with me. Always feels so nice to have a conversation instead of me talking to my screen. So please feel free, ask any questions, share comments as we go through. Perfect. All right. I am going to do my little intro and then I reckon we kick off because we've been a few minutes live now. Awesome. So, for those of you who don't know me, and I know there's been a few of you who've recently joined in this group, and especially for this masterclass. So, welcome. It is so lovely to have you here with me and in my little square of the internet. So, yes, I am Evie. My full name is Evelyn Kelly, and I am a life and confidence coach. I support ambitious women to create unstoppable self belief and confidence to really own their self worth so that they can elevate all areas of their life. So, I came into coaching about 2 years ago now. I actually graduated a couple of years ago, just over 2 years, and have just been coaching ever since. Prior to that, I worked as a physio, which I loved. I mean, my driving force is always to help people. But I couldn't keep ignoring this intuitive calling within me to coach people. And I just wanted to have a beautiful, positive ripple effect and impact on the world. And so here we are talking about my favorite topic, which is just, yeah, so exciting, so cool. Also, side note, but I have a podcast that is launching this time next week, which is crazy exciting. So I'm going to be sharing more about how you can join me in the launch team if you haven't already later this week. So keep an eye out for that. But a week away, oh my goodness. Right. I am going to have a sip of water and then we're going to dive in. Alrighty. Okay, so today's masterclass, as you know, is all about how to dial down your inner critic. And if there was one thing that I think almost all of my coaching clients want support with, it's this very thing. And if there was one thing that really holds so many of us back, so many women, it's our inner critic. And so I have been wanting to do this masterclass for a long time, and I just feel like it's such an important topic to talk about. And this inner work can absolutely be life changing. I know it certainly was for me. Alrighty, so step one is really understanding what is the inner critic? Why do we have one? So that we can start to heal our relationship with it. So, when I say the inner critic, I personally call it the inner critic, but other people may call it the ego, or you may call it your inner mean girl, that nasty voice in your head. So, there's lots of different names for it. I personally call it the inner critic, but just know that these names are interchangeable throughout this content today. So, the inner critic is that negative, fear based voice in your head that says, you're not good enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not smart enough, you're not whatever enough. Who do you think you are? You're never going to get that promotion, that job, that pay increase, that whatever, the boy, the house, etc. It is the thing that constantly questions you, that pulls you down, that critiques you all of the time, and that holds you back from really going after the things that you want. And, perhaps some of you here today have been listening to your loud inner critic for years now. I know I certainly did for most of my teenage years and my early 20s. And I didn't really understand what the inner critic was and how to start to do this inner work to dial her down. Her volume was ramped right up, and it was pretty much all I listened to and all I knew. I just felt like I had this awful mindset, this negative, that I was just negative, and I didn't really understand how to work with her, what it was all about, and that I could actually choose to listen to my loving intuition instead. So I have completely changed my relationship with my inner critic, and I've learnt to calm her down, to dial her down, and to listen to my loving intuition instead for guidance. So we all have an inner critic. We all have one, and it's never going to go away completely. It's a part of who we are, right? So if we can understand why we have one, then it can be easier to heal that relationship, like I said. So, the inner critic is designed to keep you safe and to keep you small. If we can think back, several hundreds of thousands of years, the inner critic was designed to keep you safe. Fear back then was you're going to get eaten by a tiger or a lion, and it was a matter of life or death. Like, it was big. So it was like, hold on, don't step out of your comfort zone. There's this fear involved with this. Don't do that because, there's some serious consequences here. But if we fast forward to nowadays, it's completely different, right? So our fear nowadays is perhaps fear of rejection, that someone's gonna not like us, that we're not gonna be accepted for who we are. It potentially is some perceived failure. Like, but what if I don't do well at that thing? But what if I don't pass? But what if this? So nowadays, the fear is far different from what it was previously. And it's designed to keep you safe. It really wants to be heard at the end of the day. It's like, hey, I need to alert you to the fact that there's all of these possible things that could happen that you need to know about in order to keep yourself safe. So that's a little bit about the inner critic and why we have one. So just remembering that when we do this inner work, because it's never about completely getting rid of her or silencing her. She's always going to pop up from time to time when we're doing scary things and taking steps out of our comfort zone or doing something new. I still have an inner critic. My inner critic still pops up from now and then, but the difference now is that I can recognize her instantly. I know her sneaky ways, and I know how to have a conversation with her to dial her down, to soothe her, to calm her. And I've done the inner work to strengthen my intuition. So instead of listening to the fear based thoughts and getting caught in my head and my inner critic all the time, I can easily drop into my intuition and let that be my loving guidance instead. Alrighty. So that is step number one. Learn to understand her and why we have one. Step number two is to name your inner critic. And this is to enable yourself to separate from your inner critic and also to recognize her. So, what I suggest doing is naming your inner critic. So, giving her a name. I personally call it inner critic, my inner critic or critic. And you might call it something else. Maybe you call it your inner mean girl. Maybe you call it literally like a name, and you can have fun with this. Maybe it's a funny name. Um, I don't know, a negative Nancy. No offense to Nancy's, but something like this that you can say, "Oh, it's my inner critic again." Because if we say that these negative thoughts or the questions or the things that we say to ourselves or the inner critic says to us is us, then we can say, oh well, Evie, you're just negative, or I need to shut up, or I need to somehow change. And it's nothing to do with you. Like, you are greater than your inner critic. You are far more than that. You're your soul, your energy, your spirit, everything, right? You are not your inner critic. And so by naming it, it allows you to separate from it. And when you're doing this inner work, you can see it's not that I have to dial myself down, or not that I have to change any part of me as such. It's more healing your inner critic. So if you've lived, your life predominantly in your inner critic, like I did for most of my early years, it can be really hard to identify that it's different. So by naming it, it's a way of separating yourself. So what are you going to name it? Name your inner critic. Give it a name. Come up with something funny or amusing, or feel free to use mine, inner critic, just a general name. Alrighty. So next part of that, so naming it is also recognizing it. Your inner critic is so sneaky. I often use this analogy of like a cheeky little monkey going, climbing in the trees, and it's jumping from branch to branch to branch. It's going from thought to thought to thought to question to negative comment, and it's all over the show. And it is so sneaky. It will pop up in so many different ways. And nowadays I can look back and I can almost smile and laugh at it and be like, oh, that's my inner critic again. But at the start, it can be a little bit tricky. So know that it's really sneaky, and it's okay to kind of not quite understand which one is which voice is which. So we have two voices or two inner dialogues. One is your inner critic, two is your intuition. And these are like polar opposites apart, these two voices. And the best way that I can suggest recognizing which is by how it makes you feel in your body. There's also some clues in what it says to you, right? So Let's look at inner critic first. So, inner critic will say things like should do or shouldn't do. So, any shoulds and shouldn'ts is a big clue that it's your inner critic. Inner critic will often be lots of thoughts. It's like that monkey, right? So it'll be all over the show. It's scattered. There's loads of questions, loads of thoughts, loads of things that are popping up for you. So inner critic can be all over the show and it generally has quite a lot to say. On the flip side, intuition is almost opposite. So intuition is calm, soothing. It'll often have maybe a short amount of things to say, like only a few words, or maybe it's more of just a pure feeling. So consider which one is which. The next thing to consider is what it feels like in your body. So inner critic feels tight, dark, constrictive, icky. It might feel like you have a tight chest. It might feel really, you might feel really anxious. You might feel a bit scattered or fidgety or kind of all over the show. So that's inner critic. Flip side, intuition is light, expansive, exciting, freeing, calming, and reassuring. So you can see how they're completely different, right? And I'd also just like to say, if you're not accustomed to intuition, remember that's your gut feeling, that's your inner knowing, that's the inner wisdom that you have within you. So, one, name it, and two, start to recognize it more. Remember, they're quite different in terms of how they talk to you and how they make you feel. So if you're ever unsure about which voice is which at the moment, then really check in with how it makes you feel. What are the physical sensations in your body? And you can even write them out if you need to kind of really understand it and recognize it. I've just realized my lighting has gone so bad. Um, Here in Auckland, it's like pouring with rain or like brilliant sunshine today, and it never knows which one it is. So I'm just going to quickly turn up my lighting and I'll be back in 2 secs. Let's see if that's going to help. Oh, I don't know about that. We might have to leave it. Anyway, we'll carry on. Oh dear, the joys of Auckland weather. So, number three, step three, hear her out. Hear her out. Sometimes, sometimes, and this can actually be a good strategy, sometimes you can say, hey, inner critic, like, stop, no, I've got this, and close the door on those thoughts. And that can actually be can be a good strategy, and one that I know is taught by a lot of coaches as well, where you'll have a negative thought that pops up, or it's putting you down, or making you feel awful about yourself, or something like that. And then you're saying, actually, hold on, no, and just close the door on it. And sometimes that can be helpful. I think it's really tricky to do that, especially at the start when you're just learning these two voices and learning to dial the inner critic down. Because sometimes in the moment you can kind of just get caught up in it, and like I say, it's sneaky, right? So it will just pop up, and all of a sudden you're in those thoughts and you're in those moments. So it can be tricky to do that, but when you become more accustomed to this work and recognizing your inner critic, sometimes a little no, thank you, inner critic, I've got this, and then coming back to yourself can be really helpful. Sometimes, though, on the other hand, if we don't let the inner critic be heard, if we don't listen to some of these thoughts and kind of move through them, then they'll only become louder and louder and louder. Remember, your inner critic is really trying to alert you to the fact that there's some potential danger here, like that you're going to walk into some danger, that you might fail, that something might happen. And so remember that if we don't soothe her and hear her out, then she's only going to get louder. If you can imagine this like humans, right? So inner critic and yourself are two people. can you imagine like having a conversation with someone and they're like, but what about this and this and this and this? And if you're just like, no, I don't need your opinion and just move on, they're only gonna become louder and louder, right? Like they really want you to listen to them. They want you to know that there's some potential danger here, that you might be walking into a booby trap. So know that sometimes it can be okay enough to just say no, thank you, in a critic and come back to your intuition. Other times, though, and what I suggest to do when you're first doing this work and understanding the two voices is to write it down on paper. Yeah, writing it down. So, what I would say is get out a piece of paper and pen. In these moments when your inner critic's piping up, right, is to write out everything that she's saying. Everything. Say, for example, I'll use my example. When I left physio and went full time coaching, my inner critic had an absolute field day because I was stepping out of my comfort zone. I was doing something new and it had lots of things to come up that it wanted to alert me to. So it could be something like, who do you think you are? You're not good enough to do this. You're a good physio. Just stay doing physio. It's easier. It could be things like, how are you going to make this work? How are you going to make money? People are going to judge you. What if you don't? What if you don't? What if you fail? What if you don't make it work? And this is legit all of the things that my inner critic was telling me at the time. Of course, I could recognize her really quickly, right? So I didn't linger in those thoughts so much. But if I was doing this as an exercise, I would write it down. So I would say, I'm worried about this. What about this, this, and this, and this, and this? Really sit in the feelings, get it all down on paper, allow her to be heard, really allow her to be heard. This can feel a little bit icky, right? Like sometimes it can feel, yeah, it's not so pleasant, right? Because you're sitting in the fear and you're really feeling the fear. So it can feel a little bit uncomfortable to do this. But what I would say is just get it out on paper, let her be heard, talk it all out on paper. Remember, these are just potential fears, danger, risks, etc., or perceptions of hers. So getting it down on paper. And then the first part of this is then to go back through all of what your inner critic has said to you and ask yourself, is there any evidence that this is true? Is there any evidence that this is true? Is this actually fact? Or is this just perceived fears or perceived dangers? And I say dangers in quotation mark, right? So is this actually true? And if it's not, go through and cross out everything that she says that's not true. 90% of the time, the inner critic is total BS and it's not fact. It's not true. It's just perceptions or fears or possibilities or assumptions that are coming up for you, and it's not actually true. So go through and cross out all of the things that aren't true. Second part of this is then to come back and answer any legitimate questions that she might have. Because sometimes there will be legitimate questions, right, that we actually need to consider, that we want to spend some time answering and coming up with a game plan or using your intuition. So answer any legitimate questions that come up. So for me, in my example that I just gave earlier, it could be something like, how am I going to make money? So maybe that was a legitimate question. So I would go through and answer it. And so by answering those questions, it's a way of calming her down. It's a way of soothing her. And so it's like, hey, actually, I do have this plan. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and I've got this and this and this, and that's my answer. So answer any legitimate questions that come up, and answer them with love. Answer them in a reassuring way. Remember, these questions aren't supposed to completely throw you off whatever it is that you're wanting to do. It's just to alert yourself to the fact that there's these other things that your inner critic wants you to consider. So sometimes it's like, how would it actually work? What does it actually look like? Maybe it's making a schedule, making a plan, like putting some things in place. So answer those legitimate questions already. Number four, step number four, back up, back it up with your loving intuition. So once we've got all of your inner critic stuff down on paper, we've crossed out everything that's false, and we've answered the legitimate questions, then come back to your intuition. And sometimes, well, often, this will naturally come through for you. Once you've really sat in your inner critic and gone through every like possible fear, scenario, question, doubt, all of that stuff, then naturally it will come through. I was having a conversation with a client about this just last week, and she was like, "Oh, but I found it really hard for my intuition to come through at the end." And we then did some coaching work on it, but we realized that it was just because she didn't want to sit in the fear or sit in the inner critic as long, and the inner critic still had more to say. So if we rush this part, like if we rush to get to, oh, but I just want to feel good again and get back to my intuition, which is totally normal and okay. But if we rush that and we haven't fully heard our inner critic and what it has to say, then it's going to be really hard to get back into your intuition. So that's just a little reminder there. If you're rushing the process, just come back to the inner critic stuff first, really get it all out, and then come into your intuition. So, what do I mean by intuition? Like I alluded to the fact earlier, is your intuition is your inner knowing. It's your inner guidance, your inner compass. It's that loving, kind, compassionate voice within you. It feels so warm and reassuring, and it's like getting a big hug. You may also know this as like your gut feeling. It's your instincts. And sometimes your inner critic, sometimes your intuition doesn't have a whole lot to say, like I said earlier. Sometimes it's more just a feeling or like an inner knowing, like, I just know that this is right for me. Or maybe it just has a couple of words to share with you. So use your intuition to reassure your inner critic. So, really, really listening to your intuition, hearing it out, and leaning into the self trust. If you're not so accustomed to listening to your intuition, there is lots of things that you can do to start to foster that inner connection and intuition. For example, things like meditation, things like journaling, things like oracle cards, things like actually talking and having a conversation with your intuition. That perhaps is a separate masterclass and something else to talk about at a later date. But there is things that you can also do to foster that loving inner connection with yourself and with your intuition, so that when you're doing this inner critic work, if you can strengthen your intuition alongside this work, then it's going to be like a winning combo. So just remember also that, in today's society, I don't think we're really taught this stuff a lot of the time. And I think today's society often fosters us living in our heads, making really considered decisions, thinking things through, um, like looking at all of the possibilities and things like that. We're so taught to be in our heads and use our minds a lot, use our brains, and that's really fostering inner critic stuff, right? We're not often told or taught to do what feels right for us. Listen to your gut, listen to your intuition, use that to help you make decisions. I so think that, this work doesn't often come naturally to us because it's not something that we're often taught or fostered. Unless it is, of course, fostered in your household as you were growing up, which is a wonderful thing if it was, but I know it certainly wasn't for me. And so coming back to this inner work now, or previously for me rather, but coming back to this work in your adult life to dial down your inner critic and foster your intuition can be wonderful, life-changing work. Already, we are still good for time. Amazing. We are charging through. So, just lastly, something to consider, maybe something, a food for thought, is to really change your mindset around fear. And this isn't necessarily, one of the steps in that four-step process. This is just something else to consider. What if the fear that's coming up, what if the fear that the inner critic's trying to alert you to the fact of, what if it actually means that you're on the brink of expansion and up leveling? What if it's actually a sign that you're on the right track? So, for example, the fear or the inner critic stuff that comes up where you're like, oh, I'm really scared to jump into my dream job or to call in my dream relationship or to go for that promotion at work or to move into a new role. What if, changing careers and doing your soul work is really, really scary, right? What about the fear of truly being yourself, owning your authentic magic, owning who you are and your gifts? Like, what if the fear around all of that was actually the sign that it was a sign of growth? What if it was the sign that you're exactly where you're supposed to be and that you're just on the brink of this new elevated version of yourself and that you're just about to shine through? I think that's a really lovely way to reconsider some of the fear that might be coming up behind your inner critic. And if we really lean into self trust, if we really lean into our intuition, our loving guidance within us, like just imagine what you could achieve, what you could step into, what you could call into, instead of living in this little box that our inner critic puts around us to keep us safe, to keep us small, to keep us in our comfort zones. What if we would just had to take a little step out of it to do this healing work with our inner critic, and then we could step into this new elevated part of ourselves? What if we could up-level all of our lives? How exciting would that be? Alrighty, so I'm going to do a bit of a summary now, but if you have any questions at all, please pop them in the comments box now, and I will come back and answer those in just a moment. So feel free to ask away. Alrighty. So to summarize, we all have an inner critic. It's never going to go away completely. This work isn't about trying to get rid of her completely. It's not about silencing her. It's not about completely shutting the door on her all of the time. It's about changing your relationship with your inner critic. It's about soothing her. It's about calming her down. It's about fostering that connection with your intuition, your inner knowing, your inner guidance, that loving, supportive, kind, compassionate voice within you, and using that to be your guiding light instead. This work takes practice, right? It takes practice. It's not just a light switch that we can just turn off and then that's it. We never hear from our inner critic again. That's really not how it works. And I guess that's not really how any of this inner work works, right? It's never like a quick fix. It's always a practice, something to commit to keep wanting to dial down your inner critic every time it pops up. Come back to this four-step process, come back to these tools and use them each time it pops up. Because guess what? Like, I still have an inner critic. I still have fear that pops up when I'm doing something new, when I'm expanding, I'm growing. But it's just that I don't let it hold me back anymore. And I definitely don't let it put me down all the time. So, this is the work to commit to and to continue to commit to. but I promise that it works, right? Learning to dial down your inner critic can be absolutely life-changing. It certainly was for me. And, there is no way in hell that I would be here today being a coach and delivering a masterclass on inner critic if I hadn't done this work on myself several years ago. Like, just no way. It just wouldn't happen. So, just to recap that four-step process is one, to understand it. Really understand why we have an inner critic, what's its purpose, what's its role, and why does it keep popping up for us. Two is to name your inner critic, separate yourself from it, and to start to recognize her sneaky ways more and more. Three is to hear her out. She just wants to be heard. She just wants to alert you to the fact of that there's all these possible things that might go wrong, that you might be in danger here, perceived danger. So hear her out. Write it all out on paper, sit with it, feel it, move through it. Cross out all of the statements that are false, that are not true, and then answer any of her legitimate questions. And then step number 4 is to use your loving intuition to be your loving guidance. Use that to soothe yourself, to reassure your inner critic, to calm her down. Maybe you want to adopt some new practices that start to foster your intuition as well. But really starting to use your intuition to calm her down, it can be life changing already. So I just see there's a question from Sally Ann. Amazing. I'm going to come back to you in 2 seconds, Sally Ann. Alrighty, so just before we dive into questions, I just wanted to let you know that if you want to take this to the next step, if you want to really work on dialing down your inner critic together, I have 3 coaching spots available at the moment to work with me one-to-one. I would love to support you in this way, and we can dive into this work more. I think sometimes when we're doing inner critic work, like I said earlier, it can be which voice is which and how do I do this in certain situations? Or you can bring to the table your own personal examples and we can work through them together, obviously. Of course, there is absolutely way more that we can cover in one-to-one coaching in a 4-month series. But just know that if you want to work on this inner critic stuff, this is 100% my jam. You are absolutely in the right place, and I would love to work with you. So, if this sounds like you, if you've got an inkling, a calling, if you've got that intuitive nudge, then absolutely let's keep talking about this. I am going to pop the link to my website where you can look at all the details in our little chat here. So you can come and have a little look at that if you like. But I'm going to be booking discovery calls in the next week. So if this is something that you'd like to have a more of a conversation around, we can talk about what coaching actually looks like and all of the details. Then make sure you book in a discovery call. I would love to have a chat with you. Of course, you can always email me through my website if you like, or I'm going to be sending out this masterclass recording, the replay after this. So, of course, you can always just hit reply to that email too. So, first and first serve for those coaching spots. There is 3 of them available. I would love to work with you if this sounds like something that would be really supportive for you. Alrighty, so questions. Sally Ann, when you write it out, do you write it in her verse? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I would. So I'd be like, I'm so worried about XYZ. Like, how are you going to make this work? Like, for example, my one was, but you're a great physio. Like, why are you wanting to leave physio? Or it could be, I guess that's an example, right? But whatever it is that she's saying, literally write it out word for word in her voice. Yes, because she wants to be heard. Um, you could also do maybe like as a starter, be like, my inner critic is saying dot dot dot. or my inner critic's trying to tell me dot dot dot, and then say, I'm worried about this, I'm scared about this happening, what about this thing? Um, yeah, it's really getting out all of that fear speak, all of the inner critic stuff on paper. I hope that answers your question, Sally-Ann. Do we have any other questions today? I'm just going to stay on live for a few more moments. If you do have questions, feel free to pop them in the comments box. Yeah, so good for time. I didn't yabber on too long. I thought I might get off topic there, but 40 minutes, it's pretty good. Alrighty, no other questions are coming through. So I'm assuming that there's no other questions today, but if of course you do, or things pop up, or if you're watching this on the replay and you have any questions, then flick me an email or you can pop them in the comments below in this feed on the Facebook group, and I can come back to those questions soon for you. Alrighty, I don't think there's any other questions. I'm just waiting. Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay in the questions in the live video, but doesn't seem to be anything else coming through. So if that is all, then we will leave it at that today. Thanks so much for those of you who could join me live today. It was so lovely to be here with you and to talk about inner critic stuff. And, here's to dialing down your inner critic. Go away, implement, practice, see how you go with this stuff. And if you do want to do some more work together, then absolutely book one of those discovery calls. It would be an absolute joy and pleasure to work with you and to support you in this way. I honestly can say that it's changed my life, and I know it's been so supportive for so many more of my other one-to-one coaching clients. So yeah, it would be an honor to work with you. Alrighty, I'm going to leave it with that, guys, but I will see you all another time soon. And yeah, hope you have a wonderful day. Good luck with all this inner work. And yeah, I'll see you all soon. Bye.